place, and I think you'll hear the same from our colleagues in Europe very shortly.
Mr. Secretary, the Gang of Eight has never leaked.
Senator,
It is critical that you consult with Congress.
Right here, this tiny 4-second moment is where everything snaps. Senator Coons has spent minutes building a case brick by brick, broken consultation, blurred red lines, allies losing faith. A president swinging threats on social media like it's a hobby. And then, when he finally corners Secretary Rubio on the absolute core issue, trust, the response he gets is that. Watch closely when we get there, because that little hesitation, that defensive tone, that throwaway senator, isn't just filler. It's the sound of a Trump-aligned official running out of room to maneuver. But before we get to that boiling point, we need to rewind this hearing, because what Coons does in this exchange is not just critique. It's a methodical dismantling of the administration's entire narrative around military action, foreign alliances, and executive power. And Rubio, who once prided himself on demanding transparency from previous administrations, suddenly finds himself trying to justify decisions he once insisted were unacceptable. So let's break down how this hearing goes from calm procedural opening to a full-blown clash over secrecy, military escalation, and a president freelancing threats on social media. And look, pay attention to the tone Coons uses at the start. He's not shouting. He's not throwing punches yet. He's setting the stage in a way that leaves Rubio almost no path to wiggle out. If you rehearsed for months, you had time to consult. That line becomes the gravitational center of the entire confrontation.
My basic question is, what are we doing here? What is the point? What is the goal of this hearing?
How do I know?
As you know well, having served on this dais alongside me for 14 years, this is an oversight hearing. And the point, the purpose of oversight is to encourage, if necessary, to compel consultation between the administration and Congress. And I just wanted to raise with you at the outset, of course the Commander-in-Chief has, under Article 2, the power to defend the American people against an imminent threat or an incoming attack. How else could we be kept safe? But our Article 1 power requires consultation. I'll agree with all of my colleagues. Nicolás Maduro is a bad guy. He was indicted. There was a bounty on his head over several administrations. His removal, flawlessly executed by American troops, thankfully none of them hurt, did cost the lives of 75 to 100 Venezuelans and Cubans, was a dangerous and high-risk maneuver. I am glad that it ended as well as it possibly could. But the point here that I want to make first is that it was rehearsed for months. The administration had a number of contingencies it was trying to navigate through. But over the course of months, when the administration was taking strike after strike after strike against drug trafficking boats, in several instances where senior leaders of the administration briefed this committee and others, we were told that military action to remove Maduro was not on the table, that the campaign to try and deter drug trafficking was not going to include the exact military action that followed. Yet it was being rehearsed. If there was time to practice, there was time to consult. And consulting with Congress is not just some high-minded principle, not some abstract thing, not a nice to have, it's a got to have. And look, the chairman opened by saying that this was limited in scope and duration, that it was executed flawlessly, and we should all be happy about the result. That much I agree with. But our president continues to threaten Delcy Rodriguez and the remnant of the Maduro regime with military force if they don't comply. We should know, what are the policies, what is the path, what is the plan forward? You and I both know the long and painful history of wars that began and seemed to be resolved and then opened up into excruciating, expensive, years-long conflicts. In Iraq in particular, in Libya and elsewhere, things do not always go as planned. And so consultation with Congress that is truthful and forthcoming and transparent is critical. In your service in this body, you knew that, you experienced it. I was in the room as you held to account members of previous administrations for not coming forward as they should have. So, look, in order to avoid our men and women in our armed forces going into harm's way doubting whether they have the support of the Congress, consultation, hearings, and deliberations are required. I understand the risk of leaks. That's a risk every administration takes. But at the end of the day, our framers entrusted the power of the declaration of war to this body, not to the executive. And where there is the time to consult, there has to be consultation. Second, I just wanted to talk about allies and alliances.
All right. This is where Coons begins the slow burn pressure campaign. Notice the structure of his approach. He starts with a seemingly simple, almost disarming question. What are we doing here? That line isn't confusion. It's framing. He's planting the idea that the entire purpose of this hearing is a direct response to the administration cutting Congress out of a months-long decision-making process. And look at how he builds the timeline. He walks Rubio and the viewers through months of rehearsals, classified briefings, assurances that military removal of Maduro was not on the table, and repeated claims that the drug interdiction mission was the full scope of operations. Every piece of that is meant to corner Rubio into acknowledging that someone wasn't telling the truth. Not necessarily lying, Coons doesn't push that word, but being less than transparent while rehearsing an operation that cost dozens of lives and carried massive geopolitical risks. And Coons does something smart here. He acknowledges Maduro's brutality, the success of the operation, and the lack of U.S. military casualties. That's strategic. He intentionally strips Rubio of the easiest talking point, but the mission succeeded defense. By doing that, he forces the conversation back to the constitutional question. Consultation isn't optional. It's required. And when there's months of preparation, you've got time. You've got time to brief Congress. You've got time to tell the people responsible for war powers what you're planning. This is the moment where Rubio quietly starts losing control. Because the more Coons grounds his argument in constitutional obligations, the less room Rubio has to hide behind operational details or excuses. And you can hear the intensity rising when Coons shifts from Maduro to NATO. Watch how abruptly the tone changes. That's intentional too. He goes from constitutional oversight to international trust, and he brings receipts. He cites Denmark. He cites Article 5. He cites the actual number of casualties, 52 Danes who died fighting alongside Americans in Afghanistan. That's the kind of detail that lands like a punch. It's not theoretical geopolitics. It's blood. It's sacrifice. It's a partner nation that has already put lives on the line for the United States, and Coons uses that to directly challenge the president's rhetoric Rubio has been defending or normalizing. The implication is crystal clear. You don't get to disparage NATO members while relying on their troops. You don't get to threaten Greenland, of all places, like it's a real estate listing. And you definitely don't get to pretend our allies give us nothing. Rubio feels that framing. You can almost see him tightening his jaw as Coons walks through it. But the most devastating part isn't even the NATO critique. It's when Coons ties everything together. Military actions without consultation. A president making threats on social media. Allies shaken. An armada steaming toward Iran. And Rubio being asked point blank to do what he used to demand from others. Tell the truth. Consult Congress. Reinforce the alliance system the U.S. depends on. This is the first turning point. Coons is in full control. Rubio hasn't started speaking yet, but the pressure is already baked in. Now let's roll the second major section of footage, because this is where Rubio tries to defend himself, and the defensive posture becomes the story.
Thank you. Well, let me unpack the 3 points you touched upon: consultation, NATO, Greenland, alliances in Greenland. Let me tell you on the consultation. Look, this has been a point of tension, not just in this administration and Congress, but in multiple administrations. As you rightly pointed out, I was a big fan of consultation when I was sitting over there. Now, you know, it's a different job, different time. But it's not, that's not necessarily the point. This is a very unique situation that we faced here. The fact of the matter is that our mission, and the one you were briefed on and talked about, that mission remains ongoing, and that is the counter-narcotic mission that we continue to carry out in the, as controversial as it may be. You may not all be fans of it, obviously, but it is happening in the Eastern Pacific, and it is also happening in the Caribbean Basin. The problem is, or the good news is, there aren't a lot of drug boats moving in the Caribbean Basin anymore, and that's what we had briefed Congress upon. This specific mission that you've talked about, one of the reasons why you rehearse it is to see if it's even feasible to basically go to the president and say, is this something that's even an option on the table? The truth of the matter is that this mission could not have been briefed to Congress because it wasn't even in the realm of possible until very late in December, when all of our efforts to negotiate with Maduro had failed, and the president was finally presented these options and made these decisions. It was also a trigger-based operation. It may never have happened. It required a number of factors to all align at the right place at the right time in a very limited window, and it wasn't even clear if it was ever going to be possible. There's also the aspect which I do not control, and that is deference to the Department of War on operational security. Despite the fact that we had kept this quite constrained, the truth of the matter is that this was leaked. We now know it was leaked by a contractor at the Department of War that, had it been published, would have endangered the lives of people and/or would have probably canceled the ability to carry out the mission. So this is a real tension, and one that I'm doing the best I can to try to manage within the constraints of two things: operational security and also decisions being made. There are multiple contingencies for events all over the world, including some that none of us think were ever going to come to fruition. And in this particular case, one of the reasons why you rehearse these things in advance is to know whether it's even possible. Is this even doable? And what are the risks associated with doing? So you can present options to the president, who ultimately makes these decisions. In the case of reimagining NATO, it most certainly has to be reimagined. And the reason why it has to be reimagined is not because its purpose is reimagined. Its capabilities have to be reimagined. Let me give you as a point of example. There's a lot of talk about security guarantees. And it's something that there's general agreement about now with the case of Ukraine. But those security guarantees basically involve the deployment of a handful of European troops, primarily French in the UK, and then a U.S. backstop. But in fact, the security guarantee is the U.S. backstop. It is not and I'm not diminishing the fact that some countries in Europe are willing to place troops in a post-war Ukraine. What I'm pointing out is that is irrelevant without the U.S. backstop. And the reason why you need such a strong U.S. backstop is because our allies and our partners have not invested enough in their own defense capabilities over the last 20 or 30 years. Now, hopefully that's going to change. Hopefully that is changing. And in some cases and in some particular countries, it's already changed. But this is a fact that we cannot ignore. NATO is going to be stronger if our allies are more capable, especially, and here's the reality, whether we want to accept it or not, we have interests all over the world. We have interests in the Middle East, we have interests in the Western Hemisphere, and we most certainly have interests in the Indo-Pacific. A number of you have already pointed out that China is the chief challenge. We can't have the same soldiers or the same ships in both Europe and in the Indo-Pacific. We have to pick. No matter how many ships we build, no matter how many capabilities we grow, we're going to have to make these adjustments. And the stronger our partners are in NATO, the more flexibility the United States will have to secure our interests in different parts of the world. That's not an abandonment of NATO. That is a reality of the 21st century and the world that's changing now. In the case of Greenland, I'll say we're in a good place right now. We had excellent meetings with the Secretary General of NATO. In fact, even as I speak to you now, there'll be some technical level meetings between us and our partners in Greenland and Denmark on this issue. And I think we have in place a process that's going to bring us to a good outcome for everybody. The president's interest on Greenland has been clear. It's a national security interest. It's a long-standing interest that predate this administration. It's one that our allies acknowledge is real. I think we're going to get something positive done. We're going to begin that process in a very professional, straightforward way. It begins today, and it'll be a regular process. We're going to try to do it in a way that isn't like a media circus every time these conversations happen, because we think that creates more flexibility on both sides to arrive at a positive outcome. And I think we're going to get there. And I thought it was noteworthy and important that despite your concerns, the president at his speech in Davos made very clear that the United States was not going to use force or military force in Greenland. So I think we're going to wind up in a good place. We got a little bit of work to do, but I think we're going to wind up in a good place. And I think you'll hear the same from our colleagues in Europe very shortly.
Mr. Secretary, the Gang of Eight has never leaked.
Senator,
It is critical.
Okay, this is where the cracks really start to show. Watch how Rubio opens. He tries to segment Coons' argument into neat policy buckets: consultation, NATO, Greenland. It's a classic tactic when you're cornered by a broad critique. Break it into pieces, address each piece separately, and hope it diffuses the momentum. But Coons didn't give him separate pieces. He gave him a tightly woven chain, and Rubio starts trying to snip one link at a time without noticing the whole thing is still holding together. First up, consultation. Rubio tries the unique situation argument, a claim that the mission was too uncertain, too contingent, too last minute to brief Congress. But rewind a bit, Coons already established there were months of rehearsals. Rubio knows that, so he pivots again. Rehearsals don't mean it was a real option. It wasn't in the realm of possible until late December. That response does not help him. Because the more he emphasizes uncertainty, secrecy, and late-stage decision-making, the more he reinforces the exact thing Coons is accusing the administration of doing: running military operations without transparency. And then comes the leak claim. Rubio points to a contractor at the Department of War as the source of a leak that supposedly endangered the operation. But here's the problem. Coons' argument was never that the administration should brief everyone. It was that the Gang of Eight, the highest cleared members, must be consulted. And the moment Rubio blames leaks, Coons cuts him off with the line of the hearing: "The Gang of Eight has never leaked." That's when Rubio hesitates. That's when the mask slips. That's the teaser we opened this video with. Because at that point, Rubio's entire justification collapses. He can't argue operational security when the group designed to handle the nation's most sensitive secrets has a spotless record. The excuse doesn't fit the accusation. Then Rubio moves to NATO, and this is where you see the desperation creeping in. He insists NATO must be air-imagined, not because its core purpose has changed, but because its capabilities haven't kept up. And look, on paper, that argument isn't outrageous. But in the context Coons built, it sounds less like strategy and more like cover for the president's dismissive rhetoric. Rubio leans heavily on the idea that European nations haven't invested enough in defense. But Coons already laid out the reality. NATO allies put troops on the ground for us. They bled for us. They invoked Article 5 for us, the only time in history. So when Rubio suggests the U.S. might have to pick between Europe and the Indo-Pacific, it feels like he's validating the very uncertainty Coons warned about. The kind of uncertainty that weakens alliances and emboldens adversaries. Then we get to Greenland. Rubio downplays the president's comments, insists the process is professional and not a media circus, and reminds the room that the president promised no military force. But notice what Rubio does not do. He does not defend the president's original behavior. He does not claim the Greenland pressure campaign was appropriate. He just tries to move past it, and that's when Coons delivers the final line, the one that freezes Rubio. "Mr. Secretary, the Gang of Eight has never leaked. It is critical that you consult with Congress. There's no shouting, no grandstanding, just a blunt correction that strips Rubio of his strongest defense." And his answer, the tiny moment we opened with, is raw damage control. He starts with Senator, because he has nowhere else to go. From this moment forward, Rubio isn't steering anything. He's reacting. His explanations sound like excuses. His arguments feel stretched. And the more he tries to reframe, the more obvious it becomes that Coons walked him into a corner he can't escape. And that's why this hearing matters, because it isn't about one operation in Venezuela. It's about a pattern. Secrecy packaged as necessity. Unilateral decisions justified after the fact. Allies treated like bargaining chips, and a president threatening military action online in real time. Coons' entire argument is that Congress only knows about these actions. If you want more breakdowns like this where powerful people get pressed on the record, hit subscribe and drop your take in the comments. Who do you think came out stronger in this hearing? And what was the one moment that changed the whole exchange?